The ballroom shimmered like a promise I had already broken by believing in it. Gold ribbons curled around ivory pillars, candles floated in glass bowls, and a string quartet hummed softly in the corner. Music chosen by my husband because it sounded classy. Everything was elegant, expensive, and perfectly staged. Just like our marriage, it was my birthday. 32 years of life reduced to a single night, meant to celebrate me. That's what he'd said when he insisted on throwing this party. He told everyone I deserved it. He told me to wear red because it made me look powerful. I didn't realize he meant powerless in front of witnesses. Guests filled the room. Friends, family, business partners, investors. People who knew my husband as the brilliant, self-made man. The visionary, the empire builder. Few of them knew how often he had leaned on me. How many of his ideas had started as whispers at our kitchen table. How many fires I had put out quietly so his hands would look clean. He stood beside me, tall and confident, his hand resting on my lower back like a claim. His smile was practiced, charming, the same one he used in boardrooms and interviews. To anyone watching, we were the perfect couple, success and devotion wrapped in silk and diamonds. But his fingers pressed just a little too firmly, a silent reminder that this night was his. He tapped his glass, the sound cut through the room like a blade. Conversations faded, forks paused midair. Every eye turned toward us, my friends, he said warmly, lifting his glass. Thank you for coming tonight. This evening is special for many reasons. I smiled automatically, trained by years of knowing when to perform. Birthdays, he continued, are moments of reflection, a time to let go of what no longer serves us. A strange hush fell over the room. He glanced at me, then back at the crowd. Sometimes we hold on to things out of habit, out of guilt, out of fear. My chest tightened. And sometimes, he said, chuckling lightly, we mistake support for strength. A few people laughed, uncertain. He turned fully toward me now. My wife has been many things, emotional, dependent, comfortable. Each word landed like a slap. But tonight, he announced, raising his glass higher, I choose honesty. I choose freedom. This marriage. He paused just long enough for the room to lean in. Jens here. The silence was unbearable. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My face burned, yet my body went cold. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't private. This was a public execution dressed as a toast. He kissed my cheek gently, like a man congratulating himself. Happy birthday, he whispered. Applause broke out awkward, scattered, confused. Some people clapped because others did. Some avoided my eyes entirely. I stood there, smiling, because breaking down would have been a gift to him. Inside, something shattered. But beneath the pain, beneath the humiliation, another feeling stirred quiet, sharp, and awake. As he lowered his glass, basking in his own courage, I realized something important. He thought this was the end of my story. He had no idea it was the beginning. I stood in that ballroom long after the applause faded, long after the music resumed and conversations awkwardly stitched themselves back together. My husband moved through the crowd with ease, accepting pats on the back and murmured admiration, as if he had just made a bold business move instead of tearing a woman apart in public. I watched him and remembered everything. I remembered the early days, before the tailored suits and luxury cars. Before the empire, we were younger then, sitting on the floor of a tiny apartment, sharing cheap takeout and impossible dreams. He had ambition, yes, but ambition without direction. I had been the one who listened, who asked the right questions, who stayed up late turning his wild ideas into structured plans. He used to call me his anchor. Somewhere along the way, that word changed its meaning. An anchor to him became something that weighed him down. As I drifted toward the edge of the room, memories surfaced like ghosts. Me proofreading his first pitch deck at 3 in the morning. Me introducing him to my college friend, who later became his most loyal investor. Me smoothing over conflicts with partners when his temper burned bridges. I had never needed credit. I believed in us, but belief, I learned, is dangerous when only one person benefits from it. He liked to tell people I didn't work, that I supported him, as if emotional labor, strategy, and sacrifice didn't count unless they came with a title and a paycheck. As if staying invisible was the same as being useless. What he never noticed was how much I learned while standing in his shadow. I knew the structure of his company better than he did. I knew which accounts funded which projects, which investors were nervous, which contracts were rushed and poorly written. I knew where the weaknesses were because I had patched them more times than I could count, and I knew his secrets. Not the petty ones, something far more dangerous, shortcuts taken, promises stretched thin, numbers adjusted just enough to pass inspection. He bragged about them late at night, glass of whiskey in hand, thinking I was just a quiet wife too in love to understand. He was wrong. As the party continued, I excused myself to the restroom. The mirror reflected a woman who looked composed, elegant, untouched by the wreckage inside her. But my eyes were different now, focused, alert, awake. I pulled my phone from my clutch and scrolled through folders I hadn't opened in months. Documents, emails, contracts, screenshots, insurance I had gathered without knowing exactly when I'd need it. Only that one day I might. That day had arrived. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but it no longer controlled me. It fueled me. I wasn't the emotional, dependent woman he had just described. I was the architect he had underestimated. Back in the ballroom, I watched him laugh too loudly, already celebrating his freedom. He thought he had won. He thought humiliation was power. I realized then that my greatest mistake had not been loving him. It had been letting him believe I was powerless. I slipped my phone back into my clutch and returned to the party, my steps steady, my smile calm. He had ended our marriage with words. I would answer with consequences. Dessert had not yet been served, but the air in the ballroom was already changing. What had once felt celebratory now carried a strange tension, like a storm forming behind polite smiles. I could sense it in the way conversations lowered, in the way people glanced at their phones more often than at each other. I took my seat calmly, crossing my legs as if nothing inside me was unraveling or rebuilding. Across the room, my husband was still playing his role flawlessly. He laughed with investors, accepted congratulations, and spoke about new beginnings, as though the night had gone exactly as planned. He had always believed confidence could outrun consequences. It couldn't. My phone vibrated softly against my palm beneath the table. One message, then another. Each vibration was quiet, controlled, deliberate, just like the work unfolding beyond the walls of this ballroom. The first domino had fallen. Weeks ago, long before tonight, I had updated my access to accounts I was still legally tied to. Accounts he assumed I had forgotten about. With a few taps, temporary holds were placed, not dramatic, not suspicious, just enough to demand attention. Financial systems don't panic loudly, they whisper. I watched as one of his senior partners stiffened mid-conversation, eyes narrowing at a screen. A few minutes later, another investor excused herself, face pale, phone pressed tightly to her ear. The ripples spread slowly, almost gracefully. This was not revenge driven by rage, this was correction. The waitstaff began rolling out silver carts, topped with covered dishes, the scent of sugar and vanilla drifting through the room. A symbol of sweetness arriving just as something bitter bloomed beneath the surface. My husband frowned for the first time that evening. He checked his phone, OP once INC twice. His smile didn't fade, but it tightened, stretched thin like a lie told too many times. He excused himself from a conversation and stepped toward the corner of the room, speaking urgently into his phone. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew the questions. Why now? How? Who authorized this? The answer to all of them was me. More messages arrived, a board member requesting an emergency meeting, a legal firm confirming receipt of documents. Notices sent exactly when they needed to be. After his public declaration, not before. Timing was everything. I wanted the contrast clear. Public confidence, private collapse. He scanned the room, searching until his eyes found mine. For a moment, the noise around us disappeared. He walked toward me, his steps quick, controlled panic flickering beneath his polished exterior. "What's going on?" he asked quietly, forcing a smile for anyone watching. I met his gaze without flinching. "You should check your email," I said gently. The color drained from his face as he opened his phone again. His jaw tightened. He looked at me like a stranger, like someone seeing a locked door where he had once believed there was no wall. "This isn't funny," he hissed. "I know," I replied. "That's why I didn't laugh." Behind him, conversations were unraveling. Investors gathered in small clusters. The word postponed floated through the air. Then investigation. Then silence. The man who had toasted my ending now stood surrounded by uncertainty. The dessert plates were placed on tables, forks gleaming under chandelier light. I rose from my seat. He reached for my arm but stopped himself, aware of eyes watching. "What did you do?" he whispered. I leaned in just close enough for him to hear. "I finished what I helped you build," I said softly, "and corrected what you broke." As the first fork touched cake, the empire he had paraded began to fracture quietly, completely. And this time, I didn't need applause. By the time dessert was half-eaten, the illusion was gone. The ballroom still glittered, but the energy had shifted completely. Laughter sounded forced now, conversations clipped and cautious. People who had once orbited my husband like loyal planets kept their distance, their attention drawn to glowing phone screens and hushed exchanges. Success, I realized, is only admired while it feels stable. He stood near the bar, alone for the first time that night. The man who had commanded rooms now looked uncertain, smaller somehow, as if the ground beneath him had begun to crumble. His confidence, once unshakable, had fractured into something brittle and desperate. I felt no triumph in watching him unravel. Only relief. A man approached our table, one of the oldest investors, a voice my husband had once trusted without question. He nodded politely at me, then turned to him. "We'll need to talk." The man said, "Soon, not tonight." Not privately, soon. Those words landed harder than any accusation. My husband exhaled sharply and turned toward me, anger replacing panic. "You planned this," he said, no longer bothering to hide his fury. "You humiliated me." I smiled, calm and steady. "No," I responded. "There is a difference." The legal notifications began arriving in waves. Clauses triggered, authority questioned, ownership clarified. Everything was done by the book, clean and precise. He had always underestimated how much I valued structure, how carefully I documented everything, how quietly I prepared. The same discipline he had mocked me for was now dismantling him. A few guests noticed me standing, my posture straight, my expression serene. Whispers followed as I made my way toward the center of the room. I wasn't sure what pulled me there, instinct, closure, or simply the need to end things on my own terms. I raised my glass, the room slowly quieted, curiosity outweighing discomfort. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I said, my voice clear. "This evening has been memorable." A few nervous smiles appeared. "Birthdays," I continued, "are about reflection, about recognizing what we've outgrown and what we deserve to take with us." My husband stared at me frozen. "I've spent years supporting something I believed in," I said, "and tonight I realized I no longer need permission to stand in my own name." I lowered my glass. There was no dramatic reveal, no shouting, no cruelty, just truth. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then steady. Not because they understood everything, but because they felt it. People always do. I placed the glass down and walked toward the exit. No rush, no tears, just calm. Behind me, I heard his voice call my name. Not angry this time, but afraid. I didn't turn around. Outside, the night air was cool, grounding. I inhaled deeply, feeling lighter with every step. For the first time in years, my future wasn't an extension of someone else's ambition. It was mine. He had ended me with a toast, believing humiliation was power. But power is quiet. Power is preparation. Power is knowing when to walk away after you've already won. I didn't destroy his empire out of spite. I reclaimed myself, and that was the sweetest revenge of all.